All right, welcome guys. Welcome to our first lab for our yeast breads. So today we are going to be making an artisan loaf of bread. So in class we talked about the different classifications for bread doughs. You have lean doughs, enriched doughs, and rich doughs. Today we're going to be starting with a lean dough, so a recipe that has no fat in it. Now, if you've ever had a good artisan loaf of bread, usually in very high-end restaurants, usually served with olive oil and butter, this is what we're going to be doing. Now, what's really nice about this recipe is that it's a great introduction to bread baking if you've never made your own bread. It's super simple. It does take 2 days, but as far as how much time you have to spend actually working with the dough, it's actually less than 10 minutes overall. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, for the measurements here, I'm going to give you both the metric measurement in weight, so using grams. I'm going to give you the American weight measurement, so using ounces. And then I will give you the volume metric measurement. So a couple things here. The ingredients for this bread are the amount of ingredients is very short and very simple. However, with anything in baking that is simple, the details matter. So all these ingredients, I do have to specify something about them, okay? So first ingredient is our main ingredient, where all of our flavor or in this recipe is coming from. It is going to be 500 grams or 17.5 ounces or 3.5 cups of bread flour. Okay, now if you excuse me a moment, let me go ahead and get a container of bread flour. Alright, so next time you're in the grocery store, you'll probably notice there's a few different types of flours. Now, we've talked about that here in this class in baking and pastry too, the different types of flours. The difference here between the all-purpose flour, which is what you normally find in most grocery stores, and bread flour is the amount of gluten and protein that is in this bread flour is significantly higher. We need that gluten in order to trap in gases that is going to be produced by our yeast. Not to mention, it produces a much better, chewier texture that we associate with good loaves of bread. Now, if you cannot find bread flour, you can go with all-purpose flour. However, you're probably going to need to add in a little bit more all-purpose flour in order to make this work. The bread won't come out quite the same quality as regular bread flour, but you can still make this. You just, as the process goes on, you'll probably need to dust your counter with a lot more all-purpose flour than you would with regular bread flour. Okay, so our first ingredient, the most important ingredient, is 500 grams, 17.5 ounces, or 3.5 cups of bread flour. Okay. Our next ingredient is 10 grams or 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. Now, we've described in this class before the difference between kosher salt and regular table salt, the main difference being iodine. Because we are using a living thing here in order to leaven our bread with yeast, we want to make sure our salt is as pure and as clean as possible. Most table salts have iodine in it, which not only helps, as we talked about, is a nutrient that you need in order to live, it's also in there to kill off tiny little microbes. Well, we are cooking and we are baking with little microbes, so we don't want to kill this. If you cannot get kosher salt, then finely ground sea salt works as well. If you can't get that and you just have regular table salt, then make sure you're looking for plain salt that does not supply iodine. Okay, let me just move closer to the camera here. Okay, so I know the lighting is a little bit weird here, but you'll see on the container, if you are using regular table salt, you have to look and make sure that it says explicitly on the package, this salt does not supply iodine. Okay. If you are using regular table salt, then you're going to go with a teaspoon and 1/4. So a teaspoon and 1/4 for regular table salt. For regular kosher salt, you're going with 2 teaspoons. All right, our next ingredient is 340 grams or 12 ounces of, 1.5 cups of filtered water. And by that, I mean just plain old bottled water. Bottled or in a jug or container. And yes, this does make a difference. Again, we are cooking with something that is living. You need pure water. The water that comes out of your faucet has things in it like fluoride, chlorine, as well as some other things in there to prevent things, diseases and other bacteria and viruses from growing. That stuff is good for your health. However, if you're baking with yeast, it's not necessarily the best thing. So if you can, use just a bottle of water or just filtered water. If you cannot get a hold of that, then you can still use the water that comes out of your faucet. You're just going to need to add a lot more yeast to kind of make up for the fact that some of it is going to be killed off by what is in your tap water. Okay, so 340 grams, 12 ounces, or 1.5 cups of filtered water. And then finally, 2 grams or 1/4 teaspoon, 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Okay, that's the yeast that comes in these little packets. You can go with active dry or instant dry. Personally, I always keep around instant dry, but does not really matter too much. If you are using if you're using water that is out of your tap, then I would up this to 1/2 teaspoon, just to kind of make up for the fact that you are going to be killing off some of the yeast with what's in the tap water. But for this, going with 1/4 teaspoon. So I know that's a long description as far as for only 4 ingredients in this recipe, but whenever you have simple recipes like this, and we're going to be relying on a long, slow fermentation for this, each of the ingredients does matter. All right, other than that though, from here on out, the process is really simple. So for day 1, the first step is just simply combine everything together. So in the bowl, I'm going to just add in the water. I'm going to add in the yeast. Now the salt, I don't want to pour directly onto the yeast because salt, kills, little living things. So we want to make sure we add them separately. And you can either use a wooden spoon, but you're eventually going to have to use your hands here. So I'm just going to just mix this together with the spoon. And then when it starts getting a lot more solid, I'm just going to get my hands in there and just knead it together, until there's just no more dry flour. Okay, so that's it for day 1. This is all that you're doing. Okay, so as soon as it starts coming together, it becomes a little difficult to stir. I'm just going to get my hands in there and just kind of knead this together until I don't see any more dry flour. Alright, now that you see that the dry flour is gone, you have a little bit stuck to the sides of the bowl, that's no biggie. That is it. That is it as far as day 1. What I'm just going to do now for step 2 is I'm just going to simply cover this up with plastic wrap. Now you can do this in a bowl, a container, does not matter. Alright, with it covered up, now from here on out, you're just going to play the waiting game here. You're just going to let this sit until the dough has about doubled in size. So what you're going to see, it's just going to kind of slowly grow and expand. This can take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. Now I know that seems like a huge range to have to kind of account for here. The reason being because this dough will ferment completely differently depending on your room, with your environment, whether you used filtered water or unfiltered water, whether you used 1/2 teaspoon of yeast, 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. I can't really determine what your dough is going to do. For my kitchen, using filtered water, 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, usually this gets bubbly and doubles in size in about 20 to 24 hours. Yours may take less time. Yours may take less time. Yours may take more time. So just kind of watch the dough, listen to it. If it's fermenting a little too quickly, you can park this in the fridge, let it slowly ferment. But other than that, it's pretty hands off. So I'm just gonna let this sit on my counter for a little less than a day, and then we'll start back up again for day 2. Alright, so this is day 2. As you can see, my dough has proofed up quite a lot here. Let me take the plastic off. And you can see it's risen, it's bubbly, all the yeast has activated and grown quite a lot. Now, this for me took, I think, about 16 hours or so. Yours usually will take about a day here. It's not an exact science here, just kind of look for it to be bubbling and grown at grown like this, and then it's ready to go. All right, so from here we're going to go on to our 3rd step, which is I'm going to knead it just very lightly on a counter, and then I'm going to divide and shape it. So I'm going to dust the counter with a little bit of flour, and then I'm going to work the dough out of the bowl. Okay, and as you can see, the dough will be a lot looser, it'll be a lot more sticky than it was previously, but that's perfectly okay. So I'm going to just very lightly, not go too crazy here. You want the dough to be a little bit sticky here. And I'm just going to press this just knead it just a little bit. Now, at this point, you do kind of need to go with your feel a little bit here. If the dough is super sticky, like really sticking to the counter, sticking to your hands, you need to knead it a little bit more with a generous coating of flour. The dough should be a little tacky, just a tiny bit, but not so sticky that you can't work with it. Okay, this feels pretty good. If your dough is a little too sticky, need a little bit more flour after it feels good, just let it rest for about 5-10 minutes just to give the gluten a little time to relax, and then you can move on to your next step, which is still step 3, is I'm going to divide and shape this. Now there's a couple things that you can do. You can simply just take this dough, form it into a ball, and then put it right onto your baking sheet. That's one thing you can do. I'm going to show you a couple different shapes that you can make. So if I were to take this dough and divide in half, let me show you with one half of the dough just a normal ball or boule shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the dough with the sticky side more facing upwards. And like I said, the dough should not be super dry here. It should feel a little bit sticky. Mine does, so it's perfect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this kind of like I'm working with a clock, where from my angle, you have 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dough that's at the part of the dough that's at 12 o'clock. I'm going to push it into the center, and then I'm going to grab the dough that's at 1 o'clock, bring that in. 3 o'clock, press that in. And if the dough is starting to really stick to your hands, I'm just going to wipe my palms on the counter and continue going. So 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and I'm just going to keep going around the circle. Yeah, the dough's really sticking to my hands here, so I'm just going to wipe my hands with flour. Okay. And I'm just going to keep going around the dough until I have a rough ball shape. And at that point, I'm going to roll the dough over onto its back. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this and just kind of shape it into a ball on the counter. Just using both of my hands, I'm just going to roll it across the counter. Again, the dough should be slightly sticky. Okay, if there's a ton of flour, this will just slide over the place. It's not going to form into a ball. And there we go. So I have my boule shape. Okay, now you can do this with the entire piece of dough. You don't have to do just a tiny piece. And I'm just going to place that right onto my baking sheet with parchment paper. Now, another thing I can do is I can take this dough and cut it into half again, and I can cut this in half again and just simply make a dinner roll shape out of it. Okay. Now, what you can do is you can just then take this, and with the dough slightly sticky, you just take your hands and you just start kind of rolling it across the dough and start just kind of rolling it up into a ball. And once it's formed like a tight little roll here, that's it. That's ready to go. Now, I will admit, while I'm going to be shaping these more into a dinner roll, or all these into a kind of roll shape, with this bread, with it being a much hardier, crustier loaf of bread, you're probably a little better off going with a larger piece of dough, whether it's, you know, a full boule or kind of a little mini one right here. These dinner rolls are still going to be good, it's just they're a lot more crusty, and they're not just quite as good as if you were, say, to make a dinner roll out of like a rich dough, like a Texas Roadhouse dough. But either way, you can roll this up. Okay, slightly sticking. And again, you notice I'm not using too much flour here. Form a ball right onto my baking sheet. Now, if you would like to, you can form this into more of a baguette roll shape. Now, I will admit this piece of dough is probably a little too small to make a proper torpedo or baguette shape. You probably want to do that with half of the dough or the full piece of dough. But I can still show you how to make a mini one here. So what you do is you're going to take a piece of dough and you're just going to kind of press it out almost into a rough rectangle. And then from there, you're going to take a third of the dough and you're just going to fold that right into the center and just press down with your fingers just to kind of seal it. Then I'm going to take the other third and kind of fold that into the center again. So you'll have this little crease here. And then I'm going to fold the dough in half over that crease and seal it right at the very edge here. And then using my fingers, I'm just going to simply roll the dough out. Now this is really sticking to the counter, so I'll probably just flour just a tiny bit here. There we go. Unfortunately, I can't really teach feel. You're gonna have to kind of use your gut instincts on this. And you can make sort of a rough baguette. So tell you what, I'm just gonna go ahead and bake this. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't taste good or doesn't look good? No biggie. So here again, I'm just gonna press this out almost into a rough rectangle. Gonna take a third of the dough, gonna press this right into the center. Take a third of the dough, press it right into the center. Now if there's little edges like kind of sticking out here, you can kind of fold or press that right in. And then I'm going to fold the dough right in half. Seal that up and then roll this piece of dough out. Okay, I'm just going to roll it just until I start to kind of feel that the dough is really starting to get stretched and pulled too much. Like if I pulled any further, the dough is going to start to rip. Once it gets to that point, I'm just going to stop. So that seems good. I'm going to form it right into there. And there we go. So again, yours will probably be a lot better in the form that all of them are going to be the same size. They're going to be consistent. Whereas mine, just to kind of demo this, I'm showing a bunch of different shapes here. Okay, from here, we're going to go into step 4, which is you're going to cover this with plastic wrap, and you're going to let this proof for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how long it takes for this dough to kind of proof up to a little less than double in size. Okay, from there, I'm then going to bake it, but we will get to that point. So here, I'm just going to let this proof, gonna cover it up, and then an hour and a half or so later, I will go and bake this. Okay, so this is about 2 hours later. As you can see, my dough has proofed up a bit more here. Now, I will say I probably let this go a little bit too long here, but that is okay. So now at this point, what I'm going to do just before I bake it is I'm going to score the top of the bread. This is kind of important, especially for this type of bread, because you need the crust to kind of open up. If you don't do this step, what will happen is the outside layer will kind of harden up. The dough will be really, really dense. So what I'm going to do just with a pair of scissors is I'm just going to make a couple of cuts on each dough. For this larger one, I'll go with 4 cross sections. And then on these little breadsticks here, I'm just going to make kind of a sideways. Oops. Oh. That probably won't come out as nice, but that's okay. Okay. Alright, like I said, that one probably not going to come out that great, but that's alright. Okay, so now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake these in a 400-degree oven. Now, how long it's going to take is going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on what shape you've chosen, depends on your oven, depends on how active your yeast is, how warm your room was before you bake them. I'm going to start it at about 20 minutes or so here. Then I'm going to check on it, see how it's going. If it looks like it needs a little bit more time, I'm going to just add on another 5-10 minutes or so and just keep going until all of these are nice golden brown. Now, one optional step you can do here to kind of make this help the bread expand a little bit better is you can take a spray bottle and just spray the top of these with water. Just a little bit of water that'll help kind of add a little bit moisture to the crust, so that way the dough doesn't harden too much on the top and will grow a little bit more in the oven. This is good as is. Like I said, these look good. These probably the dough kind of fell apart a little bit. That's okay, because I'm not doing this for a restaurant here. So I'm going to bake this, and then I'll see you guys back when these are finished and looking good. Alright, so this is about 40 minutes later for my oven. I realized 20 minutes was not nearly enough. Not the best like most picturesque loaves of bread I've made, but still really, really good. So you can see all my different shapes and sizes here. So go ahead and bake this yourself. Just keep an eye on it. You probably want to take it a little darker golden brown than I took it here. I just didn't want to risk burning it. Crucial step here. Even though it's really tempting to bite into some warm bread, here, one crucial step is you have to let the bread cool. Let it cool down. You can eat it while it's warm, but you definitely don't want to break into it while it's hot. Not only because you can let out all the steam and moisture that's in the bread, making it stale out, you're going to burn yourself, and also you'll lead to a texture where the inside of the bread is more gummy. And it's going to almost seem like it's undercooked even though it's stale. Alright, so that is our first lab here with yeast breads. If you have any questions, let me know. Make sure you have your Mise En Place sheet filled in. And that is it for today.